بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الهزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. I praise Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I thank Allah. I ask Allah to send countless blessings and salutations on our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his pure family and his companions, and all of those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. Welcome to another session of the Black Imams Roundtable with Sheikh Abdul Kareem Yahya and Sheikh Hamza Abdul Malik. Inshallah, we're going to have an interesting discussion tonight centered around what does it really mean to study the methodology of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, which some understand as traditional Islam, and what is meant by that, and how should we understand it in our communities. So inshallah ta'ala, we want to first open up with our senior teacher, Sheikh Abdul Kareem, and then we will go to Sheikh Hamza Abdul Malik, inshallah, to give a brief introduction and background about your Islamic studies and your introduction to this topic of the methodology or understanding the methodology of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Inshallah, maybe Sheikh Hamza, maybe we can go on mute while he speaks. I'll go too.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We praise Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. And may Allah send peace and blessings upon our Sayyid Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa abaihi wa وإخوانه من الأنبياء والمرسلين وتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We also ask that these prayers be upon the family of the Prophet ﷺ, his companions, his forefathers and brothers of all prophets and messengers, and all of those who follow them in goodness into the day of judgment, and that these be upon us with them and among them. And I'm including all of those who are with us in this stream or who listen to it. And we ask Allah that by Allah's mercy, and Allah is the most merciful of the merciful. And Allah said, and we say this prayer, and that we be answered to this prayer. رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا وَجَعَل لَّنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ وَلِيًّا وَجَعَل لَّنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ نَصِيرًا. And we ask Allah, oh our Lord, and we ask that this be for us and that we be an answer to this prayer. Oh Allah, deliver us from this land, the people of which are oppressors, and make for us from you a protector, a wali, and make for us from you a supporter, or someone who grants us victory. And alhamdulillah, by Allah's permission, I was active in a masjid in Oakland, California in the early 90s, known as Masjid al-Islam on 82nd and MacArthur in Oakland, California. And one of the things that was a blessing of Masjid al-Islam Oakland is that they had a bookstore. And the acting Amir at that time, Amir Abdul Malik Ali, who I still refer to as Amir Abdul Malik, Allah protect him, he encouraged me to begin reading the books of quote unquote safe Sufis like Imam al-Ghazali. So I got a very difficult to read translation of Ihya Ulumuddin, the Revival of the Religious Sciences, and began to read that. And in the section on knowledge, he describes the learned men, the learned people of the hereafter, and their methodology. And I was really taken by that. I used to organize my bookshelf in the way that I saw of importance of the various disciplines. And I had the book, the Sunnah, which at that time was Bukhari Muslim. You know what I mean? A translation of Bukhari, translation of Muslim. And then I put Ihya right after those. That was how I viewed it. This is how I would like to understand the book and the Sunnah. So that made me want to study. And then I was introduced in 1995 to a number of Western seekers of knowledge. And I will say a point, and we have to work against some of the marketing that is used in the United States, and also recenter vocabulary and concepts as they properly should be. So I say seekers of knowledge, and that isn't to slight any of the figures mentioned. Saying someone is a seeker of knowledge is actually a compliment. So I was introduced to Sheikh Nuh Keller, the translator of the Reliance of the Traveler. That was through correspondence, and I was introduced to his book. I was introduced also to his wife, Sahel, Sheikh Sahel. I was introduced to Imam Zaid Shakir, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Sheikh Abdullah Al-Qadi, and Sheikh Muhammad Sharif, who I feel like at that time we called him Amir Muhammad Sharif. And he was active in California around that time. That might have been later than 95 that I was introduced to him. But those figures were influential because I wanted to study like I heard described, or I wanted to keep the company of people like I heard described in Al-Ihya, and what I heard them articulating pointed me in that direction. And I understood that there were traditional schools, or schools that our community, schools of thought that the Sunni Muslims compiled our positions in creed or aqidah or tenets of faith, or to make it plain, belief. What do we believe about Allah, the messenger, the hereafter? I learned about the Ash'ari school and the Maturidi school from those works. And that was easy. And fortunately, I was never, really at that time, especially, there was a lot of Wahhabism by default, but I'd never adhered to that. And I was protected from that methodology, actually by some of those elders, because I might have been sent to a Salafi school that maybe kind of lightweight tried to recruit me or point me in that direction. And they dissuaded that, alhamdulillah. So I was introduced to, how Ahl Sunnah understood creed, which is the Ash'ari school and the Maturidi school, and the great Imams like Al-Imam Al-Ghazali, like Al-Imam An-Nawawi, who were Ash'ari. And, that was an easy one to understand. We were introduced to the methodology by which Ahl Sunnah understood law and compiled it and transmitted it in the 4 Sunni schools that have reached us. And I say that have reached us because there were many mujtahids, many jurists who their school was not compiled and transmitted such that it reached us, but it was a valid school for the people of those time, like Sufyan al-Thawri, and his school was alive until the time of Imam Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. Or at that time it was still alive. So you find it referenced. I learned about our Sunni schools and that methodology, and that saved me from thinking that I was going to go into my Bukhari and Muslim by myself and be a jurist. And I was given vocabulary of what I understood as the way of the learning of the hereafter from Ihya, which really was what I was looking for. I was looking for pious people like those described in Ihya to keep their company. So I was introduced to that group of seekers of knowledge. And again, I say that as a compliment. And in the city in which I studied, they would say of muftis, mashallah, talib ilm, he's really a seeker of knowledge. So that is not in any way to detract from anyone. That is actually an honor that I can't attribute to myself, right? I aspire to be a real seeker of knowledge. And may Allah grant all of us that and give us to die on that in lutf and afiyah and live on that. So, I saw that. I think I attended what was the second Deen Intensive that was held in the United States, and that was a vocabulary that was used. And actually, I believe the founder of that is my close friend, Sheikh Ibrahim Osiefa. The first Dean Intensives in that time with that group of teachers were held in the United Kingdom, and they preceded us by a couple of years, and I believe they began the term Dean Intensive. And then the second one in the United States, if I'm not incorrect, was in 1995, and I had the opportunity to attend that. And it pointed me in the direction of what Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya had inspired me. And this is where I have to begin introducing. I have never used the word traditional Islam for what I was seeking, ever. And that is because at the first Dean Intensive I attended, I perceived intuitively that if I was going to come from Masjid al-Islam, Oakland on 82nd and MacArthur, you know, I don't know, like just East Oakland was East Oakland, you know what I mean? Like Detroit, you have the East Side, that was the East Side. And if I'm going to come from that reality and I'm invested in the oppressed and I have to be true, eventually myself and many of these people are going to have a parting of ways. I felt that from 1995 when I first met that group of people. And that's, again, not to detract from anyone. I just intuitively understood that for me to be honest with what I have to do, it's not going to be this on the long term. And even some of the positions I would have to take, they would be inclined to disagree with. And that did play itself out eventually. Alhamdulillah. And in any case, so you know, that pointed me in the direction of traveling to study. And actually, my sister-in-law at that time, who is the Ahl, I'll say, it's more polite to her, the family of my good friend Imam, I call him Imam Dawood Yassin, because he first came back to the States into an Imam's position. My hunting teacher, alhamdulillah. My sister-in-law was actually one of the earliest Western students that stuck in that batch of students in Damascus. She actually preceded Imam Zayd's group by a year. So she was enrolled in a school called Jami' Abu Nur, right? Or they called it Abu Nur, Jami' Abu Nur. And I was put in touch with the administration, and I was also put in touch with Sheikh Nuh Keller and his wife, who were very, very, very helpful. They did a lot of khidmah for us and helped us immensely, and I continue to stay in touch with them. I visited them last Jumada, and we enrolled, and I used to vend incense and oils on the street in Berkeley, California, on Telegraph, in front of Blondie's Pizza was my favorite spot if I could get it, for those that know California. And we just worked our tails off. We ran 2 stands. I had a brother that helped me. He would set up on the other side of the street, up the block or down the block. And we vended. And at that point, you could still make money doing that. So we were able to fund what we thought would be a year in Syria. And I thought I'd come back after a year of study in the summer and work. And then we went and settled in late 1996. In August of 1996, we went to Damascus and settled and enrolled in Abu Nur and began studying basic tajweed. And I studied there for a couple of years. And in 1997, I didn't end up returning to work. I just returned to sell my belongings because Allah facilitated a scholarship, a zakat-based scholarship, actually. And I say that because one of the fitnas that I was informed of by my shuyukh in the Middle East is that people are trying to work to dry up the money streams of Ahl Sunnah. And you see these little punks online attacking every teacher here and there. And look who's getting attacked, Ahl Sunnah, and they're attacking their money now. And we've lived through COINTELPRO. Allahu Alam if it's COINTELPRO. But zakat-based scholarship, without hesitation, I would collect zakat and distribute it to students. And I hope to do so to thank Allah for facilitating that for me at a certain time. And anyone who doesn't like it, keep your money, because it's not your money. It belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He will provide for those who He provides for, especially seekers of knowledge. Whether little backstabber, lames, chattering online against people in some suburb, like it or not, and they should pick up a phone and call the people they have a problem with, rather than acting like, as I'll quote Imam Luqman, little virgins, because you want to make me regress to some hip-hop vocabulary about how you behave, chattering all the time online against people, rather than calling a grown man on the phone. In any case, that's a digression. But so yeah, we studied, and then in 1997, Sheikh Ibrahim Osiafa, Sheikh Jamaluddin Haisa, and myself were sent by your needy brother of Faqir, were sent to Tarim, Yemen. And we stepped into Tarim, and I said, here's Ihya Ulumuddin. This is it. I'm dropping my bags. We just went home to Damascus, finished up some study, and then I returned there in early 1999, where I was based until 2012. Studying, inshallah. And the shuyukh from whom I took are, they define themselves, they're Husseini, they're children, great-grandchildren of Hussein the bin Ali and Fatima, Hussein the son of Ali and Fatima, so the grandson of Allah's messenger, and they're Sunni, and they say that they're Sayyid Sunni, right? They're from the family of the Prophet, Husseini, and they adhered to the methodology of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and by creed, father to son, back to their grandfather. Al-Imam Haddad says that they are Ash'ari, and he says that's the way of the truth, and that's our conviction. And in law, they understand the book and the Sunnah according to the methodology of Al-Imam Shafi'i. However, without rigid adherence to that, there are many, many points where methodologically, or I'll say practically, they deliberately act outside of the Shafi'i school, either in the way of strictness, and that's often the case, or sometimes in the way of ease, and that's at times the case. And then by spiritual lineage, they trace their lineage through their forefathers, and also through the great Sheikh Al-Ghawth Shu'aib Abu Madian in the discipline of Tasawwuf, and their path is known as the path of Asada al-Abi Alawi, and it is based on 5 things: knowledge, applying that knowledge, scrupulousness, fear of Allah, and sincerity. And that was what we took from them, and we understood as just, learning the deen according to a methodology that Allah had preserved. And I will say, in this, centering it in this discussion, the first U.S. students to become stable in Tarim and in Dar al-Mustafa happened to be African American, and that being Sheikh Jamaluddin Haisa, and he actually, in the return, got there ahead of me by some weeks, few weeks at least, and your needy brother Al-Faqir, and then Sheikh Ibrahim also joined us later that year, and then more and more students. Though he represents, you could say, that the UK, and you could say he represents Africans in diaspora, his parents being born in Nigeria. So he has something of a different trajectory with respect to these Western imperialist powers. They went there voluntarily, whereas we were captured and robbed over here. And that's a little bit. Inshallah, I hope I didn't go too long. I'm a mute.
Imam Hamza, inshallah, if you can give a brief introduction and your introduction to the topic and a little bit about your studies and your path to where you're at today.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahabati ajma'in. Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minadh dhalimin. Alhamdulillah. First of all, I want to thank you, Imam Amin, for facilitating this discussion, and I also want to express my gratitude for putting me with one of my seniors. I consider one of my teachers, even though I haven't formally studied with Sheikh Abdul Kareem. So Jazakallah khair for that, and I look forward to benefiting from both of you. I was born Muslim, so my orientation to Islam was always something that I learned organically through my environment, and that environment was the Masjid al-Islam as well, similar to Sheikh Abdul Kareem, but on the other side of the country in New Haven, Connecticut, under the leadership of Imam Zaid Shakir and the community of people who traveled there to follow him and to learn from him. Actually, my parents have a long history with Imam Zaid, all the way back to the Air Force. My father converted to Islam in the Air Force at the hands of Imam Zaid, through the Dawa of Imam Zaid. While Imam Zaid was in the Air Force, I believe he had been Muslim maybe a couple of years. Maybe it was Allahu Alam, maybe his first shahada, the first shahada he transferred to someone, Allahu Alam, but it's very early on. And even my mother was introduced to my father through Imam Zaid and his wife. And my parents lived with Imam Zaid and his wife in when they were actually in Rutgers. I was born in Jersey, in New Brunswick, and they all lived together in a shared an apartment, I guess, to save money. So I just say that, and there's other things as well. I say that to just say, Imam Zaid, for me, has been an integral part of, my entire Islamic experience, in terms of the mashrab, or the drinking, my source of inspiration and direction. So growing up in New Haven, Connecticut, Sheikh Abdul Kareem, you mentioned the Dean Intensive. Where was that? The one you went to?
New Mexico.
Mexico. Okay. So, growing up, New Haven, Connecticut, with Imam Zaid, Imam Zaid has generally been consistent with regard to the type of knowledge that he taught. In Turkey, actually, they were the Muslims that were teaching my father, when they would go off base and learn, as well as Imams, I believe they were Naqshbandi. So that was like their initial. They didn't know it was Naqshbandi, but they were introduced to people of Tasawwuf early on, in the Dawa that were given to them early on. So the Salafi, or at the time Wahhabi, wave of Dawa didn't take hold as strongly with my family and Imam Zaid, considering that they had that orientation beforehand. So I grew up in a diverse community with people who had transitioned with Imam Warithuddin Muhammad and wanted to learn Islam more in line with the sources, with what we would call, quote unquote, traditional sources. So we had some of that, and then we had some people who were just people who had come because Imam Zaid was there. And as a matter of fact, I believe Imam Zaid in one video, he said that his conversion into Islam was into the Warithuddin community, rahimahullah. So Imam Warithuddin and his community has had it has had an effect on my upbringing, even though it wasn't direct. It was somewhat indirect. I didn't even know they had their own masjid and everything. We were in a different masjid, but many of the people who were in our masjid came from that community originally. We also, growing up as a child, and I still have pictures of Sheikh Muhammad Sharif, may Allah preserve him and increase him, early on in the early stages of his travels in the States and teaching. So I would have, so in our house, I would see, the Bukhari and Muslim and Fiqh Sunnah milestones. And at the same time, I would also see Uthman Danfodio and, all these books in the masjid, for going through all the different phases that maybe my parents, and, just whatever books were available, they would buy those. those weren't necessarily what was taught at the masjid, but there was just a wide range of literature that I grew up seeing, but not necessarily learning from. But in terms of actual people who would come to teach at the masjid, it would be Imam Zaid, Sheikh Hamza back then, before Zaytuna, obviously this was in the 90s, and Sheikh Noor, when he would come, and we also had a Dean intensive up in New Haven. I believe it might have been after New Mexico. I was young at the time. I was serving tea and serving food and things like that there. I'd met a lot of people who I would meet later overseas were there, like Sheikh Abdul Ibrahim Siyafa and others. But that was my initial orientation, was that body of scholarship, along with just knowing somewhat about the books that were available. But the scholarship was generally that type of scholarship. And so we started off learning Quran, memorizing Quran at about 8 years old. And I finished about 24 juz'. We had a Moroccan teacher. And alhamdulillah, we had the opportunity again, a scholarship, to go to Morocco. And so I left. I was supposed to leave with the same group of students that I had memorized 24 juz with to Morocco, but as it panned out, I was the only one that wound up going. And so I was 12 years old. I went there. I finished Quran there, with the whole lower system. I had to start from the beginning again because I had memorized using a mushaf. They don't actually have musahif in the school. It's not permitted in the school. It's all from memory. So, everyone walking in there was a human mushaf. That was a place where I would see people recite 10 juz', 5 juz' in their sleep, just due to the, the consistent recitation and the attachment that students had with the Quran, or people finishing Quran in one day. Every day in Ramadan, they would finish the whole Quran in a day, things like that. It was a very, very beautiful experience, unique experience. But after finishing there, it was a Wahhabi school. So they didn't, now all I learned there was Quran, but it was clear that they had, those leanings. So when it was time to study the other sciences, I was about 15. Imam Zaid actually was just leaving Syria at the time, moving to Morocco, and so he instructed me to go to Syria with another Abdul Kareem from Britain, Jamaican brother. You probably know of him, Sheikh Abdul Kareem. In any case, he took me under his wing while we were there. I was still a teenager, young, about 15 years old, 16, and I enrolled in Abu Nur, finished Abu Nur program, the 3-year program, studied with Sheikh Anas al-Hibri and Sheikh Samir, not as much with Sheikh Samir, but anyone who studied in Syria might know that when Sheikh Samir left his classes for whatever reason, Sheikh Anas would hold his position at Jami' Muhyiddin. In any case, without going into too many details, studied Tajweed. I got Ijaza in Warsh, and also began doing private studies outside of the regular formal Abu Nur curriculum. Studied with the Shadhili Shuyukh there, Sheikh Mustafa Turkmani and Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri, and the scholars that were around them. And so I would go to those majalis, and that was really where I began to understand what the religion was about, in terms of its sources. And from there, I got idhin. This was after the war in Iraq had started. It was a couple years after it started. There's a lot of instability in Syria politically. And in Yemen, we had heard that some of the political instability had kind of become a little easier. At least that's what we had heard. And I had gotten permission from my teachers in Syria to go and study with the Habayib. So I went to Yemen, and this is after 5 years of being in Syria. So I went to Yemen and studied at Dar al-Mustafa for about 2 years. And while I was there, I studied with Habib Umar every morning, and whatever else the other parts of the Tartib. But I was really there, to do whatever Habib Umar told me to do. So he had told me to study with him in the mornings, and then the rest of the Tartib in the morning with the other teachers in fiqh and tasawwuf mainly. That was pretty much the main Tartib, the specific Tartib for me. And outside of that, you have the Roha and other things like that. But when I got permission to leave Tarim to go to Egypt, once it became very clear that Syria was not going to get any better, I've been given permission to go to Egypt and study at University of Al-Azhar, and I studied there and obtained my degree in Sharia, and then from there I came back home and have worked my way into coming back to our community to teach and continue to uphold the standard of culture as well as religion that I grew up around with Imam Zayd and those, back in the 90s.
MashaAllah. So we gather from both of your stories and your background a sort of intense study and understanding the methodology of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. If you would summarize your experience and what do you understand when you hear the term Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, what is it entail to you, and what are those that we hear that term, and sometimes we hear that term mentioned, and both of you mentioned Wahhabi, Salafi methodology that claims Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah too. So how for our listening audience, how do they distinguish what is Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah and distinguish this methodology by which both of you said that you learned in similar places, as opposed to another claim of Ahl Sunnah that may not represent what you the way you acquired the knowledge, inshallah. So y'all can both take a discussion at that, inshallah.
I'll let Sheikh Hamza begin, inshallah. Bismillah. The Azhari, Rijal al-Azhar, Bismillah.
So in terms of my understanding of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah, based on what I've learned from our teachers, is that there is we have sources that that the Jama'ah of the believers draw from, and those sources are the Quran, the Sunnah, Ijma', consensus, as well as the tools of usul that are agreed upon and are mutually agree to disagree upon among the madhahib, at least when it comes to the legal schools. And then you also have within that, within all of the legal schools, those that abide within those legal schools, you have the schools of spiritual development or tarbiyah, which scientifically is called tasawwuf, which is also passed down in a similar fashion by the same people who passed down the legal schools. And so they have different names, just as the madhahib have different names. And also the same jama'ah, the same, and Sheikh Abdul Kareem is a professional translator, so I'll let him maybe clarify, correct any of these translations. But this kind of universal body of scholarship that is inherited from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the companions, to the tabi'een, to the tabi'een, and every single generation down to us. Those that unified body of scholarship collectively also have agreed upon theological principles that they follow in order to interpret theological issues and express theological concepts, which later developed into the terms of Maturidi and Ash'ari and Athari, right, or Hanbali. If there's also conversations within that. So those are the three general usul, or really furur. If we go to Imam Ghazali's breakdown of knowledge, those furur of knowledge being fiqh, tasawwuf, and theological like kalam, that unified body of scholarship is considered what will be Ahlus Sunnah and Jama'ah. But the Sunnah here also refers to the Khulafa al-Rashidin as well. So we follow the example of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, as well as the other all the companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and their example. And so that's one unique characteristic of the people of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah, as well as a mutual understanding, a mutual respect for the differences of opinion between the scholars that follow the agreed upon principles of jurisprudence. But even though they follow the same principles and same usul, they don't necessarily come to the same conclusions due to maybe some other factors that they might also incorporate in their usul. And so this was passed down from every generation down to us. And so what we'll find is that the people of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah will reference scholars from multiple different generations. Usually, if they're talking about one madhab or another, they'll focus more on the scholarship in that madhab that have constantly refined or constantly summarized or even expounded upon due to new issues that needed to be addressed based on the same principles that were used by the Sahaba and they were used by the Tabi'een and the Tabi'een and so on and so forth. And so that would be, what I would say would be people from the Sunnah wal Jama'ah.
Jazakallah khair wa nafa bik. May Allah reward you and give us the benefit by you. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So what I've learned from my shuyukh.
You can see the live comments there, right?
I can't see them.
Is a thing that says live?
Oh, yeah, I don't have that tab open.
Yeah, just click.
Can we address some of those tabs?
Live comments. You see it?
Yeah, I see it.
You see it, Sheikh Hamza? Yeah, so that's if you want to see questions sometimes, you can look at it as well. That's all the questions coming from Facebook or YouTube, you can see, or statements, just if you wanted to see where the people were at.
Yeah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Are these all who are on or only the ones who comment?
They're only ones comment. There are a bunch of people on Facebook. We have people on Facebook and on YouTube.
Hassan Ali, is that the one who used to be in Seattle?
I don't know.
Allahu Akbar. He'll comment. There's Adil. Right. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so if I could begin to answer Joma Williams' question, an example of how, and it's not just the Habayib in Tareem. Habib, if you're speaking about scholarship, refers to a scholar from Ahlul Bayt, and as a term, it's also used to, like a child calls his grandfather Habib. So it's a general term of respect, and they apply it more specifically to generally to people that are from the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, through that Husseini lineage. And those that are not, they usually call them mashayikh or sheikhs. However, even those have been different over the years. At one point, they're called the Habayib, the Sada, the mashayikh, the Imam, I believe, or at least some of them are imams. In any case, the learned of Tareem, and they have amal in Tareem. They have a convention or a practice in Tareem. And an example in strictness where they act outside of the Shafi'i school is avoiding the difference of opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa by not doing voluntary prayers, even those that have a reason that precedes them, like Tahiyatul Masjid, in the forbidden times to pray. So if you entered the Mawlid of Masjid Surur that was presided over by Habib Abdullah bin Muhammad bin Alawi bin Shihab rahimahullah during our time there, typically you wouldn't see the people of Tareem pray Tahiyatul Masjid between Asr and Maghrib, because they typically avoid the difference of opinion of Abu Hanifa and do not pray in that time, though the Shafi'i schools relied upon position is to pray in that time. And an example where they act outside of the school in ease, one example that I can think of, and this relates to the question, and that's one of the reasons I've always distinguished myself from the community that calls itself traditional Islam a lot of times in the United States, which I view as an Anglo-American Islamic movement. And I don't say that in praise or blame, but, many of them were students of Dr. Abdul Qadir Sufi. And then there was a debacle there and they left and did other things. And they were based largely, though not entirely, Anglo-Muslims who were, taking a path of learning into Allah, and that's beautiful. But just certain choices within that group have really swerved from, unusual extremes. So there was a very rigid adherence to the four madhabs. You especially find a rigid adherence to certain positions of the Western Malikis in the 90s. And then you find it swerving to this other extreme that is now termed fiqh al-aqaliyat. And if you begin to cite positions from the madahib, from the four madhabs, it's almost like you're doing something makruh. And the madhabs are too rigid. You're just regurgitating ancient positions, and this is no longer applicable to this minority community and this American Islam that we're going to establish and save the world. And I'm revealing some of my bias, but the scholars of Damascus, the scholars of Fez, the scholars of Tareem, interestingly enough, the scholars of Indonesia, who are also Shafis and of the same lineage, they'll differ with their madhab at times. And within those schools, they'll differ from other localities and traditions in adherence to the same madhab. And it's not by any stretch rigid and not taking into consideration the reality of the people to whom these fatwas are being delivered. So an example of that in Hadramaut is a type of transaction called Bay' al-Arabun that they deemed beneficial. There was a maslahah for the people of Hadramaut, and the Hadrami scholars gave this fatwa. And Sheikh Ibn Hajar al-Haytami specifically, who the Hadrami scholars tend to follow in fatwa, he was very critical of that, So that's an example. There's an example of strictness and an example of ease. And then also that point that nobody's saying just, go somewhere and regurgitate the same, 1,000-year-old fatwa for every single body in every single circumstance, so that we have to go to the UAE and come save you all with this new type of fiqh and work closely with the State Department and all of that kind of stuff, and come with some okie doke and make it not grassroots again, and Allah knows best. But I wanted to talk about Ahl Sunnah. But anyway, so that's an example. La ilaha illallah. And La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And just one more point too about like a lot of this kind of weirdness in fiqh. Like how much of that, many of us who came in the early days were grassroots people. Masjid al-Islam, New Haven, right? Imam Amir Muhammad Sharif's community. Many of us who traveled and became teachers abroad are African American. How many of those minority fiqh questions really represent our reality and are of benefit to us? Or are they of benefit to, you know, someone that's basically chasing the American dream that we would call the American nightmare, and we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. So I think we should be very careful of that. And again, I understand that's a digression, but so then Ahl Sunnah, what we learned from our shuyukh, and you notice that Sheikh Hamza said the same thing, and that is a principle of Ahl Sunnah, that we follow those who preceded us. So the creed of Ahl Sunnah was what was understood and codified to be the creed of the book, the Sunnah, the Sahaba, and the Kibar of the Tabi'een. And that was codified by the likes of these two great Imams that Allah erected when they were needed. And the first of them is regarded as the reviver of his century, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. And what I learned from my shuyukh, among them Al-Imam al-Haddad, who mentions this in the section on doctrine in the Book of Assistance, that Ahl Sunnah are the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. That they observe the book and the Sunnah, the positions and belief, right? Aqidah in the book and the Sunnah. They recorded those and transmitted those as the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Why do we use the term El Jama'ah and Ahl Sunnah, right? The Sunnah is obvious. That's the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we aspire to believe as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions and the great of the Tabi'een believed. And from the greatest of the Tabi'een is Al-Imam Ali bin Hussein, Ali the son of Hussein, the son of Ali bin Abi Talib, who's known as Zayn al-Abidin, who was from the forefathers of our shuyukh. And Imam al-Haddad says about this great grandfather of his and all of his grandfathers between Imam al-Haddad and Ali Zayn al-Abidin, this was our belief from father to son back to our grandfather, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's what I'm leaning on when I say that I'm trying to follow the sunnah of their grandfather. You know, men that I met, slept in the same room, ate from the same plate, traveled in the same car, plane, train, automobile, watched them practice the sunnah of their grandfather, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, and sincerely between me and Allah, I hope, and this is the best conviction I was able to find, that if I apply the methodology that they have received from their grandfather, that I'll be adhering to the degree that I can honestly do so within, as a frail human can, and they honestly did so as human beings, adhere to the sunnah of their grandfather. And then as far as the word al-jama'ah, that comes in traditions, numerous traditions. So from them is a tradition of Ibn Majah at-Tabarani, who said it in al-Kabir, and this is a phrase of Ibn Majah: I swear by the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, you will be my community will be divided into 73 sects, firqas, or groups, you could say. Schisms, you could also say. One of them in paradise and 72 in hellfire. And he was asked, and who are they? Meaning the ones in paradise. And he said, al-jama'ah, right? They are the group. In another narration, وَهِيَ الْجَمَاعَةِ. In the Musnad of Ash-Shamiyin, hum ahlul jama'ah. Ibn Abi Shayba and Abu Ya'ala, they said, as-sawad al-a'zam, the greatest numbers, the greatest multitudes. In the riwayah of Tabarani, they said, who are they, O Messenger? Who, O Messenger of Allah? And who are as-sawad al-a'zam, the greatest group? And he said, the one who is on what I'm on and my companions, and the one who did not dispute in the deen of Allah, and the one who did not say that anyone from the people of Tawheed is a kafir due to a sin that he committed. So these were attributes of al-jama'ah that the Prophet ﷺ described. And one of the things you find about Ahl Sunnah is that if we look historically over the years, the greatest population that in Arabic you would say, as-sawad al-a'zam, linguistically, the greatest population, they were on the madhabs that we call Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Another point is they are not takfirists. They do not say that someone is a kafir because of a major sin. That, we're talking creed right now. We're talking belief right now, aqidah. When you define heterodox, to make it plain, non-Sunni sects, you have Orthodox, which we're saying is Sunni, right? Heterodox, one of the definitions of one of the early heterodox sects, one of the un-Sunni sects, who were the Kharijites. The Khawarij is that they would make takfir of someone who committed a major sin. And then another criterion, if we're going to say, okay, all right, fine. You guys say this, other people say this, okay? We say that doing tawassul is not shirk. And someone who does tawassul is not a mushrik. They're not an unbeliever. And we attribute that to hadiths like the hadith of the blind man. And I will contend, and I can say we contend, that the Wahhabi assertion that those who do tawassul through the Prophet ﷺ are unbelievers, that they're polytheists, so I can fight them, so I can take their property as spoils of war, so I can make their women concubines, that assertion of the Wahhabis, which you can find historically they made that statement and they acted according to it, that assertion is not something that can be transmitted through the generations. And if you are on that methodology, I challenge you 500 years ago to find someone who said what Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab said, that someone who does tawassul is a kafir. And I will show you scholars who precede 500 years. We will show you the compilations of the 6 sound books of Sunnah, among them, not all of them, and they will transmit the hadith of the blind man in which tawassul is done. For example, this is an example. And there are other examples. So how do you understand you're on a Sunni methodology? You can trace those tenets, those points, and that's actually a legal point, that, saying tawassul is this or that, because tawassul is actually an action, so it's from the realm of fiqh. But to say that someone is an unbeliever because of that point, then that begins to take us into the discussion of creed, and that is an attribute of the Kharijites. And Allah knows best. And then I'll just say one last point. When our community was, and this is ironic, because people would say that, like, we fall on the side of, like, unpolitical Sufis, right? But our community was an Islamic movement Jamaat. Mashallah Islam on 82nd and MacArthur was a movement Jamaat. And part of that, the movement in that time, part of it was, those people who are occupying the Hijaz and doing what they're doing, they're like they're the opposite. They're the nemesis of movement. And if you look at their genesis and their history, they cooperated with British imperialism to help the British and Western powers occupy the Muslim lands and dismantle the Ottoman Khilafah, right? So we saw them as polar opposite of movement. And when we were given access to Amir Muhammad Sharif and Sheikh Uthman Denfodio, this was a successful movement that was Sunni, that was African. I'm like, that's what I want to do. You know, that's what I want to do. So, you know, do you want to team up with someone that teamed up with the British and fought the Ottomans? Like, everybody's watching Ertugrul, right? They like this Turkish, you know, it's really a soap opera, but it's historic, you know, it has some historical basis. You know, how the Ottoman Khilafah was established. Do you want to team up with the methodology that helped dismantle that Khilafah? Because that's what you're doing. If you're following Wahhabism marketed out of that certain place, which I'm avoid mentioning because I do still like to make Hajj and Umrah and get me a visa, you know what I'm saying? That you're teaming up with those who flip the script. You're teaming up with COINTELPRO methodology. Straight up, study the history. They say it in their history. They talk about that as like, you know, we raise the sword. You look at Ismail Farouqi's translation of Kitab al-Tawhid. He talks about the sword being raised. Who were they raising the sword against? They were raising the sword against the Khilafah. And then he's sorry for being long-winded again. Allah bless you all. That's a little bit though.
So there was a question mark. Because as traditionally, we talk about Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and then you're finding in the major books of Ahl Sunnah among the books of Aqa'id. And when they're mentioning Ahl Sunnah, like the great Hafiz Muhammad Murtada al-Zabidi, he mentioned in Itaf al-Sadat al-Muttaqeen, in the Sharh of Ihya Ulumuddin, and he talked about Al-Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, and he said, Huma Imama Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. They are the two Imams of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. But Sheikh Hamza had mentioned Athari. So, and we find this time that those who hold the creed of the Wahhabiyya or so-called now Salafiyya, they disguise that creed under the name of Athari. So Sheikh Hamza, because many may be concerned about that, what do you understand when you mention Athari?
Okay, bismillah, alhamdulillah, so first of all, I want to I'm not going to necessarily contradict Sheikh Abdul Kareem. I think that the Maturidi and the Ash'ari positions are clear in terms of what's considered within the fold of Islam and what's not considered within the fold of Islam in terms of beliefs. But not everybody who necessarily follows the Salafi, like I said, which used to be considered Wahhabi methodology, actually upholds all the opinions of the theological opinions of the shuyukh that they claim to follow. So I was just saying it from that perspective. I see a number of comments about, like, you know, what is the Hanbali creed? I didn't study the Hanbali creed. Like, I didn't study Hanbali creed. I studied Athari creed. I've never been Salafi, never been Wahhabi, didn't study it. What I would say, and this kind of goes back to the point of the discussion, is for people to study Ash'ari Aqidah or Maturidi Aqidah, whichever one it is. And then from there, the issue that we're dealing with today with regard to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is far beyond these particular theological issues. I mean, we have people now, I would say the bigger issue right now is academia and the theological positions that they're taking, or the position that people are taking about Sunnah or about Ijma'. There are people right now who are saying there's no such thing as consensus. There are people who are saying that Bukhari isn't an authoritative text for hadith and things like this. I mean, we're dealing on a number of fronts. For me, if we can find people who are upholding the Sunnah, who are upholding Bukhari, who are upholding Muslim, and then some of these other theological issues, yeah, we can internally debate about those things, definitely. But the mainstream debate this isn't the mainstream debate anymore. It was, but this isn't the mainstream debate anymore. For most of the country, some parts of the country it is, and I'll acknowledge, I'm not in the East Coast anymore, so I can't, not in Philly or Jersey, so I can't, I can't represent. I'm in Memphis, and here that's not really that much of an issue. When I was in Atlanta, it was the same thing. We're dealing with, in terms of our survival as a Muslim community of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, our survival depends less on refutations and more on learning the core subjects itself. We have people who respond to things right now, or were reactionary to a YouTube video or a Facebook post, and that becomes their main source of education of what we would call whatever traditional Islam is. If you look at what Sheikh Abdul Kareem has said, and what I have said, is that our initial impulse to study this deen was to just go to the scholars and study it. Not as much going to learn refutations to go back and refute them. That sometimes that happens naturally, because the more you learn, the more you'll see the difference between truth and falsehood. But I would say the majority of people are misled because they don't know the basic tenets of the deen. If we were teaching, or if people were actively trying to learn the basic tenets of the deen, or the basic introductory books even of Aqidah, or of Tasawwuf, or of fiqh, these issues would not be issues. Though these particular ones that we're talking about, the ones I'm seeing in some of the comments, wouldn't be issues. It's just due to the lack of that information being disseminated or being learned or taken seriously, which is causing this confusion. So like I said, for example, I went to a Wahhabi Quran school. And I say Wahhabi because they said they were Wahhabi when I was there. It wasn't like, I'm not trying to call them names that they don't want to be called. That's what they said they were. And at the time, I hadn't studied anything in the deen. And so, what they said, I just kind of was like, okay, this is what you all are on. I know what my teachers say. I know what Imam Zayd says about this issue. But I respect your opinion. I'm not a scholar. I haven't studied. But then when I went to go study, those issues, they never became an issue for me anymore. It was never really a doubt about some of these issues anymore. And I would say that's the simple cure that our people need, is to study these basic, introductory books, and maybe even intermediate. But I want to emphasize here that the majority of people that I grew up with, and the people in my generation, because there's a little bit of generational difference here. The majority of people that I would say coming up in my generation and a little bit younger have been taken more by atheistic tendencies and neoliberal tendencies and the academy more than they have from the older debates on the theological points of Tasawwuf particular, and or even the Sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those questions don't even come up. They're not even, it's actually a fitna to bring them up to some people who haven't even questioned it in the first place. But that's a generational issue, because for one generation that is the question, and that has caused the problems. But for another generation, it might not be as prevalent. And so that's kind of like my contribution to that particular subject, is that I think we need to broaden, if anything, just broaden our concern about what we should be protecting our community from, based off of what people are actually, suffering from in terms of their doubts in religion. So, for example, this idea of gender, or the idea of even isnad, right? Or the idea of consensus, ijma'. These are issues that are actually becoming more prevalent, or even, yeah. I mean, these are the kind of issues. It might not even be an aqeedah issue. It might become more of a fiqh issue, following the different madhahib. Why do I need to follow? Why am I calling myself this? Why am I calling myself that? They might not know. It might come originally from, might be some residue from older debates, but they don't attribute it to that themselves. It's just a basic question. If you gave them a basic answer, it will probably solve the problem. Allahu alam. But that's what I would say about that. There's one other question I did want to address from Sabria, but I'll wait till we.
Imam, I mean, if I could chime in on the topic of the Athariya.
Go ahead.
So, yes, the Athariya. If we mean by that, like stopping at the textual articulations of points of creed in the book and the Sunnah, and not making ta'wil and so on, while affirming Allah's dissimilarity to his creation. The Athariya overlap with the Ash'ariyah in tafweed. So the Ash'ari school, those who did tafweed, who consign the meaning of any text, Allah's istiwa with respect to the throne that's mentioned in the Quran and that certain people like to stir up, right? The way of tafweed, of consigning the meaning Allah knows what that means. I believe in it because it's in the Quran. Allah knows what that means. That's called tafweed in Arabic, consigning the knowledge or the meaning of that to Allah. If we tafweed was typically the way of the early generations, and Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, he was mufawwid personally, right? That encompasses the Athari school, but people use the label Athari to sneak anthropomorphism into creed. And I agree with Sheikh Hamza that generationally, we have the issue of the doubts that are being sown in the minds of young and not just so young people by their entering the university system. And if we could just root this in some of our vocabulary, African-American Muslims, say that devil system. What sense does it make to place our young people in the school of our enemy to learn how to function? That was something that Elijah Muhammad and Sister Clara Muhammad got right. We cannot turn our children over to devils to be educated, right? And conservative adherence to the way of those who preceded us in scholarship would demand that of us as well, that we don't turn our children over. A nuance that I would add to Sheikh Hamza's point, what I'm seeing, and I also like what Sheikh Hamza said, I never debate. I don't like it. When I was introduced to Ihya, I just said, those are the people I want to be like. I want to live with people and worship like that. Debating is dark, and I'm just not into it. However, what I've seen in the context of just community work and education is that many heterodox, again, making it plain, non-Sunni, meaning divergent from, in opposition to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as we understood it, many ideas have made their way into our U.S. convert community, our indigenous Muslim community, more specifically, our indigenous African-American Muslim community. I'll give you an example. In one gathering in Book of Assistance, Imam, and it was on the section of Creed, right? I had two aunties, convert aunties, one much older than the other. And Imam Haddad referenced the word Sayyid, meaning family of the Prophet. And he referenced the word Salaf, meaning predecessors. And in one majlis that was a small gathering, many of our classes are small if we're honestly speaking, right? I had two aunties. One of them was put off by the term Salaf. The other was put off by the term Sayyid. So what does that mean? That means that those who immigrated here and brought heterodox ideologies have infected our indigenous community to the extent that you have Nawasib and Rawafid. Those who negate Ahlul Bayt and those who negate the companions, right? In one majlis, right? And again, negating the Salaf isn't necessarily negating Ahlul Bayt, but yani, it takes you in that direction, right? The Salafi way. So like, I was like, oh my God, you know? We have decades of miseducation that we're working against. And another thing, the Wahhabi fitna isn't the only fitna. Because if you look at the trajectory after immigration in this country, right? Many of the Arab immigrants brought Ikhwan Muslimin methodology. The Ikhwan in creed became Salafi, and in law effectively became Salafi, la madhabiyya, fiqh sunnah. The South Asian immigrants, right, al-Jama'ah al-Islami, neither of them were entirely orthodox in creed and law. Those are the books that were pumped into the communities. These are the umbrella organizations that still exist. And we indigenous Muslims, you know, passively by osmosis, were fed a diet that was not orthodox Islam. Like I was talking to one brother, he was talking about how Sunni Muslims, this and that. And what he means is certain, you know, this things that are not actually Sunnah. I said, brother, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we haven't even had a good go round yet. That stuff which you were introduced to that you're complaining about, it wasn't even Sunni, largely speaking, right? It was heterodox groups that were brought with the immigration. And I'm not doing this to pick on immigrants. I'm just talking about what happened. That was injected in the community. And then and a caveat to your point, Sheikh Hamza, then you have young people entering the Western Academy who are not rooted in the Sunnah of their Prophet ﷺ in belief and practice and akhlaq. What's going to happen other than misgivings? And another thing we'll say is if you look at the Salafis, who are, one of the things about those methodologies is they're disconnected from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And if you really look at them, they don't like you to be too connected to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Watch how they behave when you're in Al-Medina, shooing you away from his grave. You know, don't overdo it, wanting to touch his artifacts and blah, blah, blah. They want to distance you from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that methodology. So if you have a methodology that's disconnected from a strong anchor to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a strong sanad, and then those unanchored young people enter the educational system of our enemy, what's going to happen other than misgiving? So I would say returning to conservative adherence to Ahl Sunnah in education, again, not debate, but education. That is the strongest protection from those misgivings. And then another point, and this goes back to the point that I was mentioning about, you know, just the currents in what's called traditional Islam here in the United States. Who sent everybody to university? You know, we all were on one very conservative adherence. And then we came back and it was American Islam and it has to go after the elite and it has to this and that. And what I understand is, and I saw this behind the scenes and I've been around since 95, you know, they were the ones that sent people to university or among the ones. So if you send, and I saw a lot of my peers going to university and come out, okie doke, man. Flipping the script, things that we learned when we were sitting on our knees, you know, in front of shuyukh, and then now, you know, you got to be nuanced and you got to be on the show and you got to this and you got to that, and they're making compromising positions. Compromising for who? Compromising so we're on the side of the poor and the oppressed? I don't think so. You know, so again, that's one more point I would like to make, that I think our grassroots Jamaats, and it connects to a point I said before, we have to be willing to just go hungry if we have to. Go hungry, hustle, live simple in order to adhere to our principles and serve the people. And an environment like that will preserve, will be a healthy environment to preserve Ahlul Sunnah, because it's not easily bought, right? It's not purchased and influenced by money and things like that. And may Allah grant us to be sincere. And just one last point too, you see a lot of the Salafists, they quickly flip the script to being academics, right? It's very easy because, again, it's not really anchored and rooted in our tradition, and Allah knows best. And may Allah protect us.
Barakallahu feekuma. For me, you know, this host thing is not good for me, right? Because I got to contain myself.
No, come with it. Bismillah. We're waiting for you.
What? No, that's not right. I'm joking. But I'm learning to examine and see what is the condition of our people, right? And what I learned from this conversation, and what we learned with our teachers, right? That there are certain issues that are relative to people's areas, people's engagement, people's class in the society. All these things play a part, and people's development, how they started their studies, whom they study with, what they studied, and these are all things that we'll flush out, inshallah, over time. But what I'm noticing, and I understand just from our conversations and listening, that a lot of our concerns are from what we experience, right? And that's reasonable, right? One time they came to Sayyidina Abu Hanifa, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and they asked him, because Imam Abu Hanifa, he was heavy in the part of ilm al-kalam. And as we know him as a faqih, but he was also mutakallim, right? And most of his writings are in the science of ilm al-kalam, or al-aqidah, or ilm al-tawheed, right? The knowledge of al-tawheed, ilm al-sul-ad-din. And in fact, all of the writings that we have received with an unbroken chain from Sayyidina Imam Abu Hanifa are related to al-aqaid, are related to the science of kalam, right? His book, Fiqh al-Akbar, Alam al-Muta'alam, Al-Wasiyya, Fiqh al-Absat, Al-Risala, all of those books of Imam Abu Hanifa were about aqidah. And they asked Imam Abu Hanifa that the early Muslims, they didn't engage in this type of theology, right? Kalam. And Imam Abu Hanifa, he responded to them by saying they, meaning those early Muslims among the Sahaba, that they weren't confronted with their enemies. So they didn't need to display their weapons. But we are a people who are confronted with our enemy, so we have to display our weapons. I say that, and the weapon may differ between whatever we're confronted with. So in the grassroots, inner cities, especially on the Northeast Coast, our biggest fitna is fitnatul Wahhabiyya, right? And I noticed something today that we should really speak about it, that we have diverse things that we are confronted with, right? And we need to have answers, and the methodology of Ahl Sunnah have answers for all of those different things we're faced with, right? So going back to what Sheikh Hamza mentioned in terms of, it is important for us to become firmly rooted in our knowledge. So there are certain texts that we should have in our communities that are standard from the text of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So when I think of authority, and most of us on the Northeast, Philadelphia, Newark, DC, probably areas, New York, these areas, when we hear authority, what comes to our mind is Wahhabi. And now let me, so we can understand, put context to it. So when we say authority, traditionally, Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, as the great scholar who lived in the 8th century, Sheikh Tajuddin as-Subki, he wrote in his book At-Tabaqat, which is the biography of the great Shafi'i scholars. And he was at the level of ijtihad, one of those great scholars. He wrote about the Ash'ariyah and the Maturidiyah. And he mentioned that the Ash'ariyah, and they are the Maliki, the Malikiyah, the Shafi'iyah, and the Hanafiyah, and that meaning here Maturidi as well. And he said the Fudala min al-Hanabila, al-Fudala min al-Hanabila, meaning those virtuous scholars of the Hanabila. And as Sheikh Abdul Kareem mentioned, when we think of the Hanabila, and this is a little bit details, but I'm just giving context to it so we can have a bigger picture of what we're talking about. When we say Ash'ari and Maturidi, we're talking about those who related from the Salaf with an unbroken sanad, with an unbroken chain. And so when we talk about those Muslims, we're going to divide Ahl Sunnah in terms of madhahib, in terms of schools of Aqidah or creed. We're going to have two types, madhab al-Salaf and madhab al-Khalaf, right? The madhab of the early Muslims and the madhab of the latter generation. So the madhab of the Salaf predominantly was a madhab that had the methodology of at-tafweed, which Sheikh Abdul Kareem mentioned, which mean here leaving the meaning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it came about those ayat and ahadith that related to the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this here is best expressed as Imam al-Bayhaqi, he related in his book Al-Asma wa Sifat. This is best expressed by the statement of Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was from the Salaf, who was the Sheikh of Imam al-Shafi, the Imam of Mecca in his time. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, he related as Al-Imam al-Bayhaqi related in his book Al-Asma wa Sifat. He asked about these ayat of the Quran that relate to the attributes of Allah and those ahadith. He said, Tafsiruha, Qira'atuha, wa sukutu anha. He said that their explanation is their mere recital and remaining silent, which is tafweed, while at the same time remembering the verse of the Quran, Laysa kamithlihi shay, that no thing absolutely resembles Allah. So this is those people from the Salaf who were, if you want to say, athari. And this was the position of al-Fudala'u min al-Hanabila, those great scholars among the Hanabila. So when we think of authority in that term as Ahl Sunnah, they are included within the Ash'ariyah or the Maturidiyah in terms of following the madhab of as-Salaf, the majority of them. What some of the Salafi people, and I don't like to use the Salafi because it is another way of hiding behind this misnomer in creed. The Wahhabiyah, their approach to, because they say we follow the Hanabila and fiqh, they try to ascribe themselves to the methodology of the Hanabila, but among the Hanabila were those who were Mushabbiha and Mujassima in the 4th century, those who likened Allah to his creation, and those who ascribed Allah with attributes of the bodies. And by instance, we understand that those Mujassima and Mushabbiha who were mainly following in fiqh the madhab of the Hanabila, of the Hanbalis, they were considered in Aqidah Mujassima and Mushabbiha. And if you study the creed of Imam al-Tahawi, at the end, he mentions al-Mushabbiha. And if you study the historic context of who were the Mushabbiha in the time of Imam al-Tahawi, who died 321, which was matching with Imam al-Ash'ari in 324 and Imam al-Maturidi in 333, these people who were considered al-Mushabbiha were from among the Hanabila. They were the main body of the Hanabila that the scholars of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah refuted. And they were the same ones that Sayyidina al-Muhajir, Ahmad ibn Isa al-Muhajir, who when he took his descendants from Iraq, they were prevalent in Iraq. And that was among those fitnas that were there in Iraq that he moved to Hadramaut with his family. And if we study the lineage of the Sada Alawi and that Husseini lineage, that's why, as Imam al-Haddad mentioned in his book, Risalatu Mu'awwana, that he only described two. He described al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya. Why did he only describe? And the scholars before him, like Al-Aydarus al-Akbar, Abdullah bin Abi Bakr bin Abdurrahman al-Saqaf, when they explain Ahl Sunnah, they mentioned that because those Al-Fudala min al-Hanabila, they were included in terms of their approach among the Asha'ira and the Maturidi in terms of manhajiyya, in terms of their methodology. And that is distinctly different from what we see as Wahhabi today. So I think just in context, it's a little bit detailed, but it will put in context what we're trying to distinguish when we talk about the Aqidah of Al-Wahhabiyya and the Aqidah of the Athariyya, meaning the noble scholars from the Hanabila who are included among Ahl al-Hadith and were included among Ahl al-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And as an example of that, to show that the Hanabila rejected that, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, who was among the Hanabila, he refuted those Mujassima and Mushabbiha among the Hanabila in his book where he wrote about refuting or rejecting the aspects of a tashbih by the hands of a tanzih, by divine transcendence. So this is among the Hanabila who refuted those early Hanabila, which the Wahhabiyya today, when they recite their creed of the Hanabila, they refer to men like Al-Barbahari and his Sharh Sunnah, who were Mushabbiha in the time of the early Hanabila. So I'm just putting some kind of context, and now I'm going to go back to moderator. I know that was a long wind there, but I just wanted to mention. Go ahead, Sayyidi.
So, no, Jazakallah khair for the history. I'll say this, right? So, one trait that is, and Sheikh Abdul Kareem, you can clarify or correct if I'm off on this in any way, but one trait of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is the healthy balance or the healthy respect of revealed knowledge and reason together, and using them both to arrive at the truth. Obviously, starting with revealed knowledge and then using the intellect in order to make sense of it to the best of our ability without going outside of the text and the common understanding that can be derived from the text. And there could be in multiple ways of understanding that. Now I say that because so that's on one hand. On the other hand, as people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, another trait of the people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in every generation, they dealt with the real issues that were happening on the ground that were taking people away from Islam altogether. Whatever those most salient issues were at the time in that particular place, the people who were upholding Islam, it's really just, Islam, they were upholding that. They used whatever tools that they felt necessary from within the toolkit of the Sharia in order to address those issues, in order to solve people's problems. I say that because today, in this particular generation that we're living in, we have to focus, people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, on number one, using reason, or number one, using revealed knowledge, respecting revealed knowledge, memorizing Quran, studying Arabic, studying the Sirah, studying the Sunnah, and then also the furu', the branches that come from those sources, which is, and there are three general areas that every Muslim needs to be studying the rest of their lives. Not a little intensive here, not a little study there. This is a developmental process of every human being to get closer to their Lord. Number one is, as we mentioned, the Aqidah, in order to understand your Lord. And that doesn't necessarily, you don't have to go into as much depth with that. Only, you learn the foundation so that you know, fa'lam annahu la ilaha illahu. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, that there is no deity, no other, none worthy of worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once you know that, that's your mind. That gives you an understanding of who Allah is, how he works, and how you should think of him. But once you have that, the two other things that are much more expansive is governing our bodies through understanding the madhahib, any one of the madhahib. Pick one. Really, don't pick one. Just follow the one that your Imam is on, because he's the one, that's the one you have access to, right? And that's the one who you're generally going to follow anyway. So if your Imam is Shafi'i at your masjid, study the Shafi'i madhab. If your Imam is Maliki at the masjid you're at, study the Maliki madhab at the hands of that sheikh, because your experience is going to be similar to his. The issues that you're going to have to address are going to be similar to his, and so on and so forth. And just make sure that he's studying from a chain that goes back to the people who actually developed the science from those sources. And then three, so governing our bodies, and that teaches us what's halal, what's haram, what's mubah, sunnah, and so on and so forth. So now you've learned how to govern your actions. That's the physical area. But then the spiritual element, governing our hearts and our thoughts and our feelings, and our impulses to want recognition, or jealousy, or kibr, or arrogance, or these things, governing the heart through a system. And that requires coaching. Just like everything else requires coaching, this requires coaching, and find a sheikh that follows a good methodology on that goes back again to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can look at each one of these, just like the qira'ah of Quran. I have a couple ijazas in recitation of Quran. The Quran recitation is a revealed science. It's a revealed, it's something that is revealed, and they've scientifically put it together so it can be taught more easily. And so and that goes all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That goes back to Jibril, goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Studying those sciences with the sanad that goes back to Allah, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, gives us that foundation. Once we have that foundation, now we can address whatever the real issues are that are happening on the ground where you're at, right? Because now you know what is, like, who, maybe that issue is the theological issue. Like if you go to the academy, you go to a philosophy class, whether or not you should be in the university studying that in the first place, again, that goes back to really studying, governing your body and governing whether or not this is wajib for you to learn. Is it wajib for you to go to university? For some people, maybe, depending on what they're trying to do. For some people, it could be haram, right? But again, go back to the people who understand these principles. And and for those of us who say that you don't need a sanad or what have you, you don't need a chain of human beings to go back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in the Quran. بل هي آيات بينات في صدور الذين أوتوا العلم. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that these are ayat that are clear in the hearts of human beings, of the people who have been given the knowledge, not in the books. As a matter of fact, the ayah before that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا كُنْتَ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَمَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ إِذَا لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically is saying to us that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not get this from reading books. This knowledge, is sacred knowledge, is something that comes from human being to human being first and foremost the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then from him he's given ijazat, he's given licenses to say, okay, this Sahabi has arrived to say to talk about the laws that govern your actions, like fiqh, or he's arrived in terms of certain spiritual things that they've arrived, and these are all based in hadith. We know this for a fact if you study hadith. That's passed down and so on and so forth down to us. It's not something that you can just simply read from a book, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala implies in those ayat. And so we know this from the sources. So number one, study the knowledge that governs how we think about reality. Allah is al-haq. Number one, he is the real. And then the creation that he creates, he has sunnahs in his creation. Right, and we don't have to go into the basic elements of aqidah, but you study aqidah, you understand reality, right? What's mumkin, what's possible, what's wajib, and these things. You understand from there, understand the things that govern our actions, and that's more on a morality. The morality of what we're doing is that getting us closer to Allah, or farther from Allah, and then our governing our hearts in terms of how we're thinking and feeling about the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how we feel about each other, and these things, the actions of the heart. If we're able to establish that, it does not matter what enemy is coming to us from any angle, because we have fortified ourselves with understanding reality, understanding our morality, and understanding our spiritual path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We fortified ourselves. And I'm just going to say this.
No, I'm just getting ready to go pray. Can y'all hold on for the next 15 minutes? I'll be back.
So you mean hold on, like, what do you like?
Y'all take over. I'm just going to pray.
Right. So I say that because for some people the issue might be a theological issue, and it might go back to some old theological issues that it might go back. For others, it might be the academy. For others, it might be the fact that person is has doubts about their sexuality, right? And so they don't know what for whatever reason. Maybe for whatever reason they have doubts about their sexuality, and so they don't have the tools to process that. It's just ignorance, and so based on ignorance, they're going to go on their hawa, on their lower, base desires, and that's what's going to lead them, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ عِلْمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have you not seen the person who has taken their lowly desires as their God? And so we have to focus on that, these are the positive. I don't mean positive as in feel good. I mean positive as in active things that we need to do. Once we have that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us the fortification through that to deal with whatever issues that we have to deal with in society. Because shaitan, as we learn in on the spiritual path, shaitan operates more like a if anyone has read the book Green Eggs and Ham. I know it's Dr. Seuss. It might not be academic, but the point here is that what was he trying to do? Every time he came to him, he came at a certain angle, and every time he refused, the person refused to eat the pork, he would come at a different angle. It's not always going to be the same angle, and sometimes we can be so focused on the one angle that we feel like we're being attacked on. Shaitan has come from a whole nother angle and taken all of your children. And so you got a whole generation of children who, for some other reason, don't accept Islam, or some other reason they left Islam. Or you have a whole generation of people who don't convert to Islam because the issues that brought the earlier generations into Islam are no longer the answers that are needed to solve their particular problems. And so, for example, there was a time, maybe in my parents' generation, maybe your generation, slightly closer to my generation, like you, Sheikh Abdul Kareem, and Imam Amin. Maybe there was a time where, Malcolm X, the autobiography of Hajj Malik Shabazz, may Allah be pleased with him and Allah expand his grave and forgive him and make him among those who are close to him. People read that and then they became Muslim, right? How many? And I don't know this, but I have a feeling that a lot of people who are converting to Islam or who might convert Islam are not converting because they read currently now, because they read the autobiography of Malcolm X. It might be for some other reasons now, because maybe that like racial consciousness is not as salient anymore within the community, within the Black community, specifically our community, as it was in the past. Maybe it's something else that's solving their problem. Maybe it's our balanced understanding of sexuality and how we deal with our impulses that could be the answer to people's issues, and that brings them closer to Islam. Maybe it is how we deal with race, or how we deal with kibbut, or how we answer racial issues, but not in the format that it was in the past. And so I think as we're talking about Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we have to focus more on teaching people what is this fortress that we need made up of, and guiding people to that, and then helping them use those tools to answer the problems that they're dealing with in their time and their place. And I wish it was just a matter of bid'ah or what have you, but we're not. We're in issue. We're dealing with issues now where it's clear. We're dealing with clear and unbridled, unabashed kufr that's being taught in universities and also in popular culture, where in the past you used to have hip hop culture used to infuse a lot of Islam in it, or Islamic concepts or terms. That's gone. That's in the past. That's literally like over 20 years ago, right? That's the whole generation of people who are coming in, who are being raised in the Muslim community are now, their reference points are Kodak Black or Wayne or whatever, or whatever, and they're not referencing, not saying Salaam Alaikum, and they're not, they're bringing in a whole nother, they're bringing a whole nother, slew of issues to our community. And I'm just saying this because that's my experience. Most of the people who I grew up with, that's not what they were confused about. They weren't confused about those things. And the people who I deal with in our masjid, that's not the things that's not the main issues that we're being confronted with. Allahu A'lam.
Sheikh Hamza, if I may, there's a brother that asked a very important question that I would like to touch on a little bit, but I'd be very interested in how you would touch on it as well. And also, I think it'd be good for you to introduce the program that you're working on. So this is a question from Thomas Jermaine Carey. Assalamu alaikum. Do y'all think that some of the ways you teach, some of the ways you all teach are hard to capture the ear of the people, because or go over the people's heads here, because y'all spent so much time in the East? And that's one of the more relevant questions I've seen. And as an educator, where you could say, if we're involved in tarbiyah, which is taking something from an elementary stage to a stage of completion, right? And that could be translated as education or rearing or training. You have to meet people at an elementary stage, and then you have to bring them to a stage of completion. And in addition to that, and I think this touches more on your question, it's not just an issue of teaching, it is more so an issue of Dawa prior to teaching. You have to move hearts far enough that they're willing to submit themselves or expose themselves to a process of education. And I think that's where the huge challenge lies. And that's what personally I've spent years thinking about, and anytime you're removed from an environment and placed in an environment of education, you not only come out of that physical environment, you even come out of the physical environment where you are in the East, and you enter the environment of the mind and ideas, which become abstract. So then those ideas have to come back into a reality that's translated on the ground. And if I were to say right now, in my on-the-ground reality, the biggest barrier to education and Dawa that I see in our community is, one of the biggest barriers, are ailments of the heart and ailments, social ailments that exist within our indigenous Muslim community that have cut off generations from generations. So you have rank and file is cut off from leadership, like you say, the old heads, right? Children are cut off from parents. The community's cut off from leadership. And that is a dysfunction that needs healing. And I look at it, Sheikh Hamza is referencing history. I came of age right with the beginning of crack. I saw our community pre-crack and our community after crack. And I remember when I was living out by Masjid al-Islam, I lived in an apartment complex. It was single mothers. It was baby mamas. It was a complex full of young baby mamas, and our Muslim family and some old people, and then that was like early 90s. And then we have a couple generations that have came of age, disconnected from like a system of connecting them and nurturing them, And really my conclusion in our community is, and the teaching part is not hard if we're teaching, but most of what we're doing is not teaching. It's education, it's sermons, it's service, it's barbecuing people, it's solving their problems, it's keeping people's lights on. We have to take a generation of kids and educate them properly in Islam. And we have to continue to service those that are older than kids. But I'll say to the men, and that's one challenge. Another big challenge is our men are disconnected from those who preceded them, and our men are not being fathered and graduated into positions of authority in the community. And I shouldn't even call it that, service in the community. And to anyone, if we say we're going to take these little boys and girls from 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And it's not difficult, as Sheikh Hamza said, to sit a little kid down. We're doing it right now. Alhamdulillah. One of the kids just completed Juz Amma. Easy. That's very easy. The older students that have years of misrecitation of the Quran, it's very difficult to correct that for them. Right? That's an example of what we need to do with character and other areas. And I'll speak to our brothers. We need some remedial fathering, brothers. You got to submit yourself to something and someone if you're going to be graduated into a legitimate position in the human family of service and responsibility. Otherwise, I'll say as an educator, I'm going to have to work on your sons and keep being nice to you until you age out. And you can be upset about the old heads. You can whatever. This brother here, Imam Amin, he submitted himself to something. He became something, and he's not going to go into his background, and I won't go into his background, but he came from a background just like y'all. And I bet you he was harder than a lot of y'all and more successful than a lot of y'all at that. So don't say that it can't work. You got to submit yourself to it, though. And honestly, you got to stop asking people to be relevant for you. You got to be relevant to them. If you want to be a student, you got to become relevant to a teacher enough that he'll impart the knowledge he has for you. And absolutely it has to be relevant. But I would say to the brothers that are relevant, when are you going to acquire the education to take it to the people that you're connected to? Because a lot of my time is taking care of y'all ex-wives and y'all babies. A whole lot of my time. Trying to have classes, and your single children are running around my facility. you know, and I'm trying to educate them. I want to educate those boys, but we got to take responsibility and acquire this education. And I don't normally say things like this. I used to sit on my knees until my feet fell asleep and I couldn't stand up, seeking this. So if somebody comes up in the facility with your pants dangling off your behind, sloppy, man. There's no army in the world that's sloppy like that. Asking me to be relevant to them. I'm going to pray for you, brother. I'm going to, you know, we're going to gather food. We're going to try to keep people's lights on. We're going to try to get people out of their dirty cars and clean up their situation. And I keep trying to prop people up. We're going to work damn hard at it. But when our brothers going to step the hell back up? We have a vacuum in this country. Lesbians lead the movement or led the movement against our police brutality. And honestly, that was on y'all shift. I was overseas being irrelevant. How in the world did that happen? You know, so whatever it takes, brothers need to step up. You know, and again, I'm not pointing a finger at anyone, and forgive me if I'm, you know, revealing some of the frustration, but like if Sheikh Amin waited and said, when is this going to be relevant to me? He wouldn't be Sheikh Amin. I don't even know what his old name was. He would be something else. He wouldn't be reciting Allah's book properly. He wouldn't be able to sit in a community and day in, day out, educate people and build community in this country. You know, and the work can be done. I would like Sheikh Hamza to explain the work he's doing. That's the work. Taking a few young people and gathering them and teaching them this tradition. You know, and there's people on the fence. When are y'all going to be relevant? Frankly, when are y'all going to earn some money and give it to Sheikh Hamza so he can teach y'all babies? That's the question I want to know. If you're not an educator, when are you going to earn some damn money, keep your car clean enough that you can drive around and give Sheikh Hamza some money? If you're 30, 40, 50 years old, earn you some money and give it to Sheikh Hamza so he could teach y'all babies in a way that's relevant. And don't ask him to be relevant to you. He'll be relevant to your kids, and your kids will be relevant to the generation behind them. And excuse me.
Jazakallah khair for that fundraiser, Sheikh Abdul Kareem. No, seriously. That's, you can hear,
seriously, though, tell them about the program.
No, I will. No, I can, you know, there's a real concern. I think, you know, for the people who are in the comments, it's important to understand that everyone here has a real concern, and you know, I'm just a mild, you know, I'm a mild version. But what Sheikh Abdul Kareem said, I feel the same way as he feels about what's going on in the community, and I think part of the problem is that as people who claim, and when I mean people, not leadership, I mean congregations and communities, people who claim to say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah and follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's example, unfortunately, we expect it to be too self-serving, that this is just meant for us and our feelings. There are people out here who are really suffering, who really need like the little bit of knowledge that is being taught, even like one sentence or two sentences that someone like Sheikh Abdul Kareem and Imam Amin is teaching in their masajid. They could use that, and that could change their entire life. And I think maybe sometimes we've been Muslim for so long, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَطَالَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْأَمَدْ فَقَسَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. Like maybe the time that they've been in this has been so long that their heart has become hard to it. They're not sensitive to the truths that are the basic truths that we know can change a person's life. So I just want to say that. But in terms of just answering your question, I don't know, you know, to particularly that the person who's making that comment, I don't know who you're referencing or who you're referring, like, you know, what the basis of that is. But in my experience, the people, when we moved I used to live in the suburbs. We moved to one of the worst hoods in Memphis, Tennessee. It's actually featured on Gangland, Klondike neighborhood. One of the worst neighborhoods in terms of crime. We went there wearing, and I used to wear a thobe. We look Muslim, not all the time, but in terms of a thobe and things. But it's obvious we're Muslim. We'd go around, we'd say "Assalamu alaikum" people. But what you'll notice in those neighborhoods is that people look towards the Muslims, and they still look towards the Muslims to basically help them solve the basic problems, and starting with their faith. They want to have faith in something. And no one, and many of the people who tend to be people who complain on the comments are people who may not be as engaged in that, so they might not see that reality. But when I go to the streets, and I moved into that neighborhood, I bought a house, I bought property in those neighborhoods. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he went to Medina, he bought property, or the masjid was bought from the people in Medina, right? From the orphans. It was the orphans, correct? The orphans. There are some basic things that have nothing to do with East or West. It has to do with just following the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As Sheikh Abdul Kareem mentioned, are we taking care of the orphans? Are we taking care of the people who don't have fathers? Where are those men? Right? It's fine, general question, mashallah. But this is a general answer. As men, are we taking care of the children who don't have fathers in the neighborhood? Not just the Muslims, but even the non-Muslims in the neighborhoods that we come from, neighborhoods that we identify with. When we come to these neighborhoods and we build playgrounds and we do these barbecues and we actively teach them using language that they understand about Tawheed, about the things that I mentioned in terms of Aqidah and how to govern your body and how to govern your heart. These are things that you can easily, and for those who think that going overseas can make you out of touch, and if anything, it makes you more in tune with reality than out of touch with reality. If you go to the right shuyukh, that's the main thing. So when Sayyiduna Al-Hajj Malik Shahbaz, may Allah have mercy on him, he went overseas for over a year and studied with and sat with some of the top shuyukh of that time in Egypt and in West Africa, North Africa, and in the Hijaz. He sat with them. He talked to them. He studied under them, and they brought shuyukh back to the States with him. And he became even more in tune with reality and even more relevant. But that doesn't mean that you don't change. You should always change to become better, become more refined. When I was in one time, we were outside the masjid, and people in our neighborhood, because they don't even see Muslims. Muslims don't even come to this neighborhood because it's dangerous and everyone's afraid of it. These type of things. So they were coming and said, I want a thobe like that. I want to dress like that. Then the women would say the same thing. I want to dress like these women. And so that exposure, bringing your families down, coming as a unit, as a community, as a jama'ah instead of individuals. That's one aspect of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah that is very important, is being with the jama'ah, moving as a jama'ah, going as a community to the people who are most receptive to the message, and feeding them, helping them do whatever their problems are, solving those problems. So as a result of that, I'll just mention this. As a result of that, we started food pantries, we started gardens, orchards, playgrounds. We bought up property in the neighborhood, renovated those properties. Drug dealers in the neighborhood became Muslim, completely ended all drug activity in the neighborhood. Now they're the ones who go, and they actually they come on Fridays and they feed people in the neighborhood now. Those same people who used to hustle in the neighborhood, now they're feeding in the neighborhood. And we started a school to teach young people, and to teach young people in a context, the deen, the the sciences that I just mentioned. We're teaching them those sciences, but we're teaching them in a context where they can learn it and put it to practice in the place that they live in. And so they'll find people. So, we have high school students. This is Miraj Academy, I'm assuming that Sheikh Abdul Kareem was referring to. And they come from all over the country. These are people, and they're not just African American. I mean, and you'll be surprised. There are all kinds of, but generally descendants of converts. But they come from all kinds of backgrounds. They reflect the diversity of the convert community today and their children. So we have the mixed with the Asian, Euro American, and African American, and Latino American, Native American. Good mix. It looks like the UN, the UN. And so they come, but they all come doing the same thing, similar to how the Prophet ﷺ came. It's a very diverse community, but they were all serving the poor. They were all answering people's questions, helping them solve their problems, and teaching the revealed knowledge that people need to know in order to understand reality and to govern their bodies and their hearts. And so but the sad thing, and this is what Sheikh Abdul Kareem was referring to, the sad thing that we found is that it's our communities, meaning the African American communities, that are most critical and least enthusiastic about the work that we're doing for ourselves. And it's the other communities that are dumping their zakat, like, oh, yeah, here gives, because they're not everyone, in the other communities are on the same page, but enough of them are to where it helps sustain us. And so my question is back to the congregation. Where's the support? All I see is critique, not for me specifically, but for the work Sheikh Imam Amin is doing, for the work Sheikh Abdul Kareem is doing, or for the work Imam Jihad is doing, or Imam Fatin in Las Vegas, or the Jamaat of the Shehu in different areas. Where's the support? Right? There's plenty of criticism to go around, but where's the support? Where are the bodies? Where are the men? We got sisters who've been looking for husbands for 20 years, right? Can't find nobody because the brothers are not worth marrying, and nor do they want to marry the sisters. They would rather go and do some other stuff. So this is the question that we really need to be. These are the issues that we really need to be solving. And alhamdulillah, actually our neighborhood is the highest. They have the highest rate of foster care children in the state. Highest rate of foster care children. And so we come across all kinds of kids. And what are they looking for? They're looking for purpose. They're looking for meaning in life. And who's going to give it to them? If you're out there in the suburbs, you're a Facebook activist in the suburbs, and the most action that you get is a like or a share on Facebook. Where's the sunnah in that? Right? These are the issues that the imams here and the shuyukh that I know of are at the front lines of.
And can I ask you a question, Sheikh Hamza?
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing anything different than the pious shuyukh you saw in the East?
Absolutely not. It's actually
that's what we saw our shuyukh doing, brothers. That's what prophetic followers do. They take the revelation, they bring it among the people, they practice it, and serve and heal the people with prophecy. And again, there is a disconnect, though, in our communities, especially among our men. Anyone who is highly educated and engaged in education is going to disconnect from many of our men. We've got to close that gap. And that relates to things in our community. But one of the things I'll say to the brothers, man, y'all got to change the media you're consuming. If you're consuming the media in its trajectory post-crack in our community, what you're constantly consuming is going to be the very opposite of the medicine that the likes of Sheikh Hamza are going to try to impart. And don't tell me it's irrelevant, man. When are you going to be relevant to the Quran? Because I can tell you the Quran will always be relevant. Sheikh Hamza's, Sheikh Yahya's, Sheikh Ching Chong Wong in China, I'm sorry to say it that way, I'm not making fun. When they had the Quran and they gave it to their people, it will always be relevant. And there will always be naysayers on the side that want their dunya and their deen that say it's irrelevant. And to them, I say, when are you going to shut the Netflix down, son? When are you going to shut down your Spitfire or whatever, Spotfire, whatever it is now? And stop consuming poison that is the opposite of prophecy, so that someone like Sheikh Hamza can come and plant his beautiful seeds in a heart that isn't full of filth that will destroy it.
If I can share some things, I looked at some of the comments.
Imam, I just
Go ahead.
Brother Thomas mentioned 2 generations of men missing from the masjids. We can address brothers not stepping up. I'm assuming that means stepping up. But you still have to address why no one is really stepping up. I think we've lost a couple generations. Part of the reason why we lost generations is due to the lack of community support. I mean, specifically financial support in building institutions that can preserve the religion in those generations. And so what Sheikh Abdul Kareem was mentioning about schools, like, so for example, and I'm not a mufti. I'm not even close to that. And maybe Sheikh Abdul Kareem can enlighten us on maybe the hukum of this. But if you know for a fact that your children will be systematically taught and graded and judged according to their sensitivity towards homosexuality and according to their regurgitation of atheistic understandings of the natural world, what is the ruling for sending your children to an institution where they would be taught those things and they will be judged according to those things? What's the ruling on that? What's the hukum? Is it wajib? Is still wajib to send your children there? My point is that how we lose those generations, we send them to people who systematically remove religion from their consciousness and their spirit. And then at the same time, while we're supporting those public school systems and universities by sending our children there and paying tuition, we actively do not give money to the masajid and the Muslim schools that we're starting that would instill the prophetic values and spiritual development that they need. And so for 20 years, maybe more, they're going through this track. And so what else? And the masjids I'll go to a masjid that's been open for, decades and still can't get $15,000 to fix the roof of the masjid, still leaking, or things like that. We know, and it's not due to a lack of money in the Muslim community. If everyone just, spent the amount that they spend on Netflix and Amazon Prime, then we'd be good. If everyone did that, our communities would pretty much be good, at the very least. My point is, that's how after 1 or 2 generations, you'll find that they're all gone. Now, because we're not supporting institutions. We might support a personality by maybe, cheerleading for them. But when it comes to giving money and giving resources and lending our expertise to really create the build our capacity within our institutions, that's lacking. And after 10 or 20 years, you'll find that all the men will be gone, and as well as education. So if we're not teaching the education that governs their bodies and so on and so forth, they'll wind up being misled and fall into the vices that everyone else in this country falls into. And so we have to support that. That's really what it comes down to. We have the expertise. As you can see, I mean, Sheikh Abdul Kareem and Imam Amin are just 2 examples among many who have studied. And I think Sheikh Abdul Kareem mentioned a number of people who have studied. Those are people, if you just put your support behind them, put money behind them, even the students that we're building at Mi'raj, these are students that are high school students, and they're being educated to become the future leaders of our communities. That's what it's designed to do. If we want to see future leaders that can lead people in their own generations in 10 to 15 years, we have to put our support behind them. We have to create the scholarships to educate them, and then support the communities that are going to host them and allow them to lead the congregations. And that's a fard kifaya upon us. And if we don't do it, we're all sinning. You point the finger in any direction, but start with our own selves. And that's what I would say for that. And sorry about that tangent.
If I could chime in on Jermaine's follow-up, but we still need to address why it's 2 generations of men missing from the masjids. And we can address brothers not stepping up, but you still have to address why people aren't stepping up. I agree with that. And as I said, that is maybe the biggest question that's been in front of my eyes since I got back in 2012. I left in 1996, and the Dawa was still, thriving in our area. And we have different, that's way out west, man. That's the West Coast, and Islam got there later than it did the East Coast and Midwest, but the Dawa was still quite strong. There were a lot of men. There were a lot of very enthusiastic men. And I came back and I'm like, where are all the brothers? Like, where's all the activity? And, where I'm at right now with it, and I'm not saying I have the answer, and this is like, I had, coffee on my porch with Imam Salim Khalid, and those who are in Detroit know what I mean. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, and this is what we were talking about. And where I'm at right now is we need remedial fathering. We need those men that were successful, Imam Nadir Ahmed, Imam Abdullah El-Amin, Imam Salim Khalid, and others. And I'm just talking about local examples. We need to revisit the question of how men are reared and transitioned into positions of service and responsibility in the community, because for some reason that process was disrupted, right? And many have slipped away. While we still have that generation among us, we've got to try to repair some of that. And I would add that education has got to become a part of that. And the other thing, and Khalil addressed it, that our elders would do it yourself. They had a lot of sacrifice and aspiration to learn the deen. And many times the resources that were given them were very simple resources, or even incorrect resources. And they did the best that they could. So we do have to do some correcting. And that's going to take, and again, this is ironic I'm saying this, but I want to conclude on this note. From those of us that are elder and those of us that are educators, that's going to take a lot of mercy and love from us. And inshallah, if I'm at all tough today, inshallah, brothers, it's tough love. And it's just real talk behind the scene among ourselves, right? Mercy and love from us. But from the young guys, it's going to, and also the guys that aren't young, but they still need some of what they missed when they were young. It's going to take humility and honoring those who have occupied those positions, respecting the old heads, right? And the old heads being loving and compassionate and reaching the hand down while they're still, limping around, poor things, much older than they should still be having to serve, so that they can bring some of us up. So I would say remedial fathering is necessary, and remedial masculine initiation, but on the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not on, some imported Salaf, some imported heterodox ideology, that was brought with the immigrants who came here, and not on something else that's deviant from the Sunnah of the Prophet, but on the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is what I would say. That's where I've come to. And then a whole lot of just taking some of the little babies that have never had a disrupted tarbiyah and giving them good tarbiyah from the beginning. And Allah knows best. I have to make Maghrib though, speaking of. So I'm going to jump out and pray. If y'all are still here, I will unmute and Allah reward you all. But the one whose call must be responded to has come. And afam minkum. Assalamu alaikum. And I'll be back, inshallah, if y'all still here.
Did you promote your program, explain to the people? Because this is important, because there are a lot of single mothers, there are a lot of families who got kids that they want to save. So maybe if you explain more about your program. It's extremely important that we support and empower one another, but we got to share that information. So Sidi, inshallah, if you can give a little more, about your program and what you're doing. I mean, I visited there. I was very impressed. And in one of the issues I raised to you, if you remember, that we need to get more of our African-American Black children in these positions. So inshallah, if you can be a little energetic, push the issue.
Inshallah. So the program is called Mi'raj Academy. It's based off of the idea of the ascension of the Prophet ﷺ to the heavens. The idea is to, develop these kids and develop these young men into leaders, where they can come back to their communities after experiencing what they experienced and lead their communities. And so the program is our community is full of educators in Midtown Mosque, and so we leverage that to guide them through high school curriculum online, and so they get their high school diploma online, and that gives them the freedom to memorize Quran and do community service and learn basic fiqh and learn basic aqidah and basic Islamic studies. There's a residential program. So these are students that come from different parts of the country and they live in Memphis, and they basically learn how to become leaders. So within the first year, they're giving khutbas at the masjid or at some of the places locally, as training. They lead community service efforts like planning for the food pantry, spearheading some of the planning for the food pantry, or doing some of the leg work. They volunteer in feeding people. They volunteer in doing the cleaning the streets. They walk through the neighborhood together. They study in the masjid. And I mean, they're just, it's just we try to make it a well-rounded program. So they get their secular academics, but they get their secular academics within an Islamic environment, as well as learning their deen and memorizing Quran. So we've now kind of more recently shifted towards memorization more so, and then during the summers, creating more intensives in the subjects like Aqidah or Ulum al-Quran or these type of things. But during the year they focus more on Quran and Arabic, memorizing Quran and learning Arabic, because hopefully the idea is if they can finish 4 years and memorize Quran and learn Arabic, then they will be given the advantage that they need if they wanted to go overseas or if they wanted to continue their studies, to actually continue their studies and exceed and do exceedingly well in that. So that's pretty much what the program is. Now it's for any young people, but it's not a reform school. I want to be very clear about that. We do need reform schools. Like, we do need to reform a lot of kids, but the problem is, a lot of times when we do efforts, we try to do it and we try to, because we're so open-hearted and we want to help everyone, we'll do everything for everybody, but that means nobody gets much. And so the priority for us is to, and I can't emphasize this enough, our priority is to identify students that are going to be potential leaders of community and that want to be leaders of their community, not just people, a safe space for them to learn a little bit of Islam and then go back home. For us, we're trying to have long-term impact, and we don't need a whole lot of students for that. We only take up to 10 students in total, and we only take students every 2 years because we really want to focus on quality more than quantity. Want to focus on the quality of their education more than how many of them are there. And so if you do have students that are between 13 and 15 years old and already can read Quran, and have decent character and have some perseverance and resilience to where they're willing to live away from their parents and go through manhood training, push-ups, martial arts, archery, serving the community, walking through the neighborhood and everything like that, then this might be the program for him. But more importantly, for everyone else who doesn't have that, we create scholarship. We have a scholarship fund and an endowment fund that allows us to choose based on merit and not just choose based on who can pay tuition. And that is heavily reliant on people to give donations. So we might have a student that might be able to come to Mirage. He has the drive, he has the characteristics that we're looking for, but he needs the money to do it. We're taking care of him full time. We're basically adopting them for 4 years. So that requires money. And we don't try to overburden the parents if they can't afford it. And so if you have Zakat funds, you want to give monthly, this is what sustains those students. Unfortunately, in the past, there used to be awqaf trusts that were developed specifically for these things, and you didn't have to rely on donations. But now we rely on the community to do that, to give donations yearly. But it's 501c3, it's tax deductible and everything, Zakat eligible. But this is the future. The way I see this is more the way I came up. I came up having memorized Quran, 24 juz of Quran before going to Morocco, and just that alone, having had that alone before going to overseas, gave me a strategic advantage to really developing much more quickly. The majority of people who study overseas that come from our communities do not get what they came there for, because they come with inherent disadvantages, not knowing Arabic, not even barely being able to read Quran, and then they have to go through all the what all the other challenges, whether that's medical issues or racial issues, or just lack of awareness of what's going on, or political issues. These are all inhibitors. And so what we're trying to do here is, number one, create future leaders that are oriented in this culture and in this society and is used to dealing with our problems. And then it's easy to send them overseas from there to, strategically to places where they could study and develop, and then come back. But they've already been oriented in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and they've already have a healthy respect for the work that's being done. And so this is what, so far we're on our fifth year now, fourth year, fifth year. We're working on our fifth year now. We take students, but like I said, we're very critical about the type of students we take, because we want them to last. And so they need to be resilient, and the parents also need to be resilient and disciplined and focused. And we also we try to raise the money as well, and that is, again, that goes back to the community and trying to raise funds with the community. And we still would need more funds. We need about 30,000 more, because we're trying to renovate a facility for them, the stone building I was mentioning to you, Imam Amin, when you came out here. We want it really costs about 150, but just to get started, we want to get at least the 30,000 to renovate the building. And that's all. This is all in the neighborhood. They do all this in the neighborhood. The food pantry, the Quran, everything is all walking distance from the neighborhood. And they're an inspiration for the people in the neighborhood. Remember, I was talking about foster children. The highest rate of foster children in Tennessee is in our zip code. This is what they see. They see a group of young men walking down the street with dignity, with the light of Quran that they just recited for 4 hours in the masjid, walking down and fasting Mondays and Thursdays and feeding people. This is one of the best forms of dawah you can give. And they know it too. The students themselves, they know it, and they see the impact that it has on people. And the hope is that within 5 to 10 years, if we can continue to fund these students, that they go back to the communities they came from. They go back to Atlanta. They go back to Oakland. If we had anyone from Detroit or from Atlantic City, they go back to those places and support the imams and the shuyukh that sent them here. And you have a succession plan, and you also have an endowment that continues to produce those people. And so, inshallah, that's what we're, that's what I'm committed to. And hopefully, the biggest inhibitor, be honest with you, biggest inhibitor, whether it's the masjid, when we started the masjid, or the school, is just getting our own people to support it, getting our own people to put money behind it. That's really the biggest challenge. It's really there's no other bigger challenge that we faced so far. Is getting African American Muslims to put money and resources behind the work. That has been the biggest challenge, and inshallah, I believe that if we can change that, then we'll see a fetter, we'll see an opening. When we start doing these things for our own communities, then we see openings, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam.
Inshallah, we have like 7 minutes really. So, because I have another class at 10 o'clock, so I have to shut the system and open up to get to the education part, where we'll be reading, starting our reading of Risalatul Jamia and going through a tartib of books, so our people can get that thing that Sheikh Hamza was mentioned, that you just go through and then you get your intellect right, and you get your knowledge right. So we're starting that process. So inshallah, if Sheikh Abdul Kareem and Sheikh Hamza, you can close out with a 3-minute close out. We'll just have to come back to all these long discussions. And this is a marathon, not a 40-yard dash. So inshallah, we'll finish it at another time. So Sheikh Abdul Kareem, if you can give us a few words, closing words, then Sheikh Hamza, and then Sheikh Abdul Kareem, if you can close us out and dua after Sheikh Hamza.
Bismillah. So I wanted to add one point that a lot of my time right now is focused on spending time with elder, peer, younger men and boys, because I realize that it's absolutely essential, first of all, for my own development, but also for tarbiyah of men in our community. So if I'm lamenting those concerns, inshallah, that's not to pick on our men, right? It's saying that these are the leaders and the responsible parties in the community, and also that's where I'm working right now. We have many good brothers, many good sisters, and there needs to be cooperation between our men and our women. And one of the challenges that we expressed of like single parents and what have you, most of the divorces I know, and my wife and I spoke about this, they're initiated by the sister. So if there's a problem in the community, it's definitely, there's work to be done on both sides. And there are many good examples of those that are cooperating on both sides. And may Allah grant us that. And may Allah give us to do tarbiyah, to give education and rearing of our people. And I just wanted to make this dua again and have us reflect on this. And that is Allah saying in the Quran, and I believe it's 75 in Surah An-Nisa, Allah said to us, and this speaks to each of us, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ. And why do you not fight in the way of Allah? And in tafsir they say, and in the way of, you could say for the sake of Allah and for the sake of those who are weak, right? And thus mistreated. They're deemed weak and thus mistreated of men, women, and children. And if we're honest, brothers and sisters, this applies to our community. And Allah says that we have to each struggle for His sake and struggle for the sake of people that have that description. And that description fits many of us and many of our communities. And I ask Allah to give us to rise to that. And what is their dua? And I think it behooves all of us to make this dua. And I believe our ancestors made this dua. رَبَّنَا أَخْرِجْنَا مِنْ هَذِهِ الْقَرْيَةِ الظَّالِمِ أَهْلُهَا. O our Lord, deliver us, rescue us from this land, the people of which are oppressors. وَجَعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ وَلِيًّا. And make for us from you a protector, an ally. وَجَعَلْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ نَصِيرًا. And make for us a supporter, someone to grant us victory. We ask Allah to grant us that, and we ask Allah to make us that, and give us to respond to this call to our own people and anyone who fits this description, and rise to the call of the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not just in this land, but in the East and the West, And we ask Allah that in khair and lutf and afiyah. And please excuse me if I've been a little long-winded tonight.
So alhamdulillah, in terms of closing statements, just going back to the general theme of studying, traditional Islam, or continuing to pass on the torch of the prophetic guidance according to the way that it was intended to be passed on. As leaders or servants of the community, it's our job to try to be as honest with the community as possible, and try not to hold any of the revealed knowledge back, and help lead people morally and ethically in the right direction. But it's also the community and the congregation's job to take that and to support that and to move that agenda forward, and to give dawah and to spread that to the people who we can't necessarily reach. Look at Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Many of the early Sahaba became Muslim through Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, due to the immense amount of da'wah that he was giving, as well as freeing the slaves. Similarly, the congregation, we have to take responsibility for going out and spreading the message and executing the direction of ethical guidance that is needed for the people in these neighborhoods. And so we have to come together. We have to form communities. We have to support those communities, get over our differences, get over our egos, and support our communities with resources, and support them with our work. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Every generation, there are people who are considered the foremost, who are in the forefront. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among these people, among the sabiqeen, not just in what is called activism today politically, but also in worship, the people who are foremost in worship. There are three things that Sheikh Alawi al-Maliki mentioned, that if we can do these things, we will succeed. At tahajjud, making tahajjud, al-ijtihad, being rigorous in our study of the deen and our teaching of the deen, and solving people's problems with knowledge, ijtihad. So tahajjud, al-ijtihad, wal-jihad, and striving for the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our lives. And what I mean by that is, whatever we're doing fi sabilillah, whether it's for the da'wah that we're giving to the people, we're willing to put our lives on the line for that. When we went down to the neighborhood in Klondike, we weren't. Don't take jihad just as war. You're putting your life on the line for whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends you to do. So yeah, it was a dangerous neighborhood. We went there, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected us without having to do anything, without having to do anything with regard to violence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed people's hearts. But we can't be afraid. We can't allow our classism to inhibit us from serving the people. And so we have to be willing to put away our ego, to do jihad of the nafs first and foremost, to remove that ego that inhibits us from putting our lives where they're supposed to be. So al-ijtihad, tahajjud, wal-ijtihad, wal-jihad. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the first and foremost in that, to make among us the people of wisdom, and to make among us the people who answer the call that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made when he said three things when he entered into Medina. He said, "At'imu ta'am," feed the people, wa afshu salam, and spread peace, wa sallu fil layli wan nasu niyam, tadkhulul jannata bi salam, and pray at night while others are asleep, and you will enter into paradise safe and sound. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those people in our time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the among the imams of the muttaqeen, whether and to be recognized with that status by him and by those who are close to him, regardless of what people say in this world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to have the privilege and the honor to be considered among the people of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to be under his banner on the Day of Judgment, and to be under his banner in this world through our actions, and to illuminate our hearts with love of him, and to illuminate our bodies with actions that emulate him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this gathering a gathering of mercy, a gathering of sakina, a gathering of illumination, and a gathering that is protected through our love and our respect and our humility to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to make this gathering a proof for us and not against us, and to make our actions proof for us and not against us. Make the Quran a proof for us and not against us. Make this gathering a gathering that we reunited on the day, not only on the Day of Judgment, but in paradise with the Anbiya, with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannatul Firdaus al-A'la, and to make us among the people who will recount all of the great things that were done, that we wish we would be able to do again for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wal afu minkum.
بسر أسرار الفاتحة. Inshallah, we'll pick up in part 2 and we'll sit together and decide. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khaira. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I love you all. Thank you, Imams. Thank you, Sheikhs, for your participation. Our community needs these things. May Allah reward you greatly. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We love you, Sheikh Amin. Take care. Jazakumullah khairan wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Hamza, inshallah, we owe you a visit. Nastodiyakum Allah. Wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.